Is this the Falcons team that we saw get beat down by the Bengals in week 7 just who they are? Or can they evolve past this? And what the heck happened to Matt Ryan in Indianapolis? I'm Aaron Freeman, host of Locked On Falcons. I am joined by none other than Dave Choate, the Falcoholic himself. We're going to discuss those topics and more coming up on today's episode.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, your very humble host here on this Locked On Falcons podcast. Of course, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And we thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Locked On Falcons is free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. Give us a like, hit that bell, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So, of course, I am joined by none other than Dave Choate, the Falcoholic himself, the head honcho over at the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons, who occasionally I will throw up a column for every now and then. And Dave is with us, and we're going to be talking tonight about what went on in week 7 with the Falcons on offense and defense. We'll talk a little bit about Matt Ryan. And then, since we're doing this live, some of you guys out there, maybe at the end of the show, if we have enough time, can submit some content and give us some feedback that we can respond to live on the episode. But we'll start things off with Dave here talking about the Falcons defense. And I really thought Arthur Smith said something very poignant in his press conference today, and I do have a clip of that. Let me put that up right now.
What we thought they were. What we thought they were.
The Bengals
are who we thought they were. And that's why we took the damn field. Now, if you want to crown them, then crown their ass. But they are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook.
Sorry about that, guys. That was the wrong clip. I apologize.
No, I think it was the right clip, actually.
Yeah. But Dave, my question is, does this game basically boil down to the Bengals offense being really good and the Falcons offense being not particularly good? Falcons defense, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. And I think, the really optimistic view here is the injuries piled up to the point where, of course, the Bengals were going to kill them. But I think I wrote a couple times, and I think you observed this as well, that last week against the 49ers, there were a couple of deep shots that Jimmy Garoppolo took that, if not for the grace of God, would have been long completions, probably would have changed the tenor of those drives or even the entire game. And it was really just that, it was a little bit of a misfire. There were some drops that prevented those from being big problems. So seeing that, last week, my exact words were, uh-oh. Because if Jimmy Garoppolo can do that with Ross Dwelley and Brandon Ayuk, what is Joe Burrow going to do with Jamar Chase, with Tyler Boyd? I really think that we saw sort of what was logically going to happen here all along, which is a very good quarterback, an explosive passing attack, probably the best one they'll face this year, is simply too good for them. They just don't have the pass rushing capabilities up front, especially when you need to drop guys into coverage and pray that you can stop some of these players, especially Chase. Once the injuries started piling up on top of all of that, you just didn't have a chance. But I do think that, it's one thing for a team like the Bengals to attack this weakness, and certainly there are going to be other teams that say, we can just pass our way to a victory against the Falcons. And some of them will probably be right, but very few teams are the Bengals, which is why I'm not panicking about how bad that was. But when you boil down, they aren't good enough defensively yet to stop an elite passing attack. And as soon as Terrell went out, it was effectively over. It was probably over before that, but it was definitely over then.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. I know Locked On Bengals in their sort of game recap yesterday, and I think I kind of mentioned this on Locked On Falcons that, or at least maybe with Jarvis on the Locked On Falcons postcast, that, if you predicted 2 months ago what the outcome of this game would have been, most people probably would have predicted it to be like 35-17. And I think what has happened with the Bengals in the first 6 weeks of the season and the Falcons the first 6 weeks of the season kind of changed that perception going into the game. But then, I guess you could say that sort of cold, harsh reality kind of hit. And, I agree similarly with what you're expressing. It just feels like when you have that type of firepower with that quality of quarterback, we've seen it time and time again, whether it was week 2 against the Rams or the Bucks game or last season, where there's just not a whole lot the Falcons are really built to be able to do. They're just hoping that they can kind of withstand the storm. And in a situation like this where the Bengals are really putting a hurting on them, you kind of need your offense to at least do a little bit more than what they were able to do on Sunday. And so that's where we'll continue the conversation here with Dave Choate, talking about this offense and sort of its struggles and its one dimensionality and whether or not they can evolve beyond that. But before we get to that, guys, I want to talk a little bit and give you a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. And what's interesting about this sponsor is I actually did link up with BetterHelp this past August. I've had several sessions with them, and I can't recommend them enough if you're looking for someone to talk to so that you can navigate all of life's twists and turns. And BetterHelp's online therapy will assess your needs. They'll match you with your own licensed therapist in less than 48 hours. I know for me, a big part of what I wanted was a person of color, and BetterHelp was able to come through with a great list of options for me. BetterHelp is not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log on at any time, send a message to your therapist. You can do weekly video sessions or go via phone. A big reason why I finally signed up was that it's a lot more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is also available. And I know that was a big sticking point for me, and one of the reasons I was hesitant to try, but I changed because I think BetterHelp is basically a more affordable way to invest in myself. And if you're looking to make a similar investment, head to the website, take advantage of this special offer, and you'll get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. And we know the Falcons are trying to figure some stuff out. And if you're looking to figure some stuff out for your small business, meaning that you're trying to hire the right people, LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier for you to find the right people that you want to talk to faster and for free. You can create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach the world's largest professional network of over 800 million people. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you spread the word that you're hiring. Is going to give you the simple tools like screening questions, make it easy for you to focus on the candidates with the right skills, right experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you want to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the right candidates that you want to talk to faster. And did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And guys, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today for whether you're looking for the biggest stories, the games that matters, go beyond the scoreboard, behind the scenes with the local experts that only Locked On can provide. Subscribe to Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So, Dave, talking about the Falcons offense and their struggles in week 7, and this was something I brought up with a colleague of ours, Kevin Knight, last week on the podcast, talking a little bit about the sustainability of this sort of one-dimensional run-heavy attack that the Falcons have. And as I mentioned before, we've seen this team fall behind in games to the Rams, the Bucks, but they were able to sort of battle back in those games. And it seemed like, once again, falling behind, they weren't able to do that against the Bengals, and it wound up biting them in the butt. So when we look at this from the offensive standpoint, do we look at this as just an off week? and this is probably not going to be a major issue moving forward? Or do we look at this as something that we need to make a more concerted effort to evolve past? I know, I played the clip of Denny Green earlier, but I did actually check out Arthur Smith's press conference on Monday. And one of the words that constantly came up in that press conference was evolve, evolve, evolve. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they do have to evolve. So, I think the 2022 Falcons, especially once they get Cordarrelle Patterson back, they're going to be able to keep games close. They're going to be able to run to their heart's content, which makes Arthur Smith a happy man. And I think in close games, the defense can, force those kind of mistakes. That's been a winning formula for them. And I do think that with an easier schedule, a lot of teams coming up who are not great at throwing the football themselves, you can have a lot of success here. So I don't expect them to like blow this thing up and suddenly turn Marcus Mariota into a 40 throw a game passer. That would be really alarming, actually. So please don't do that. But you do have to get to the point where if you fall down, by more than a score, you have to be able to throw your way back into it a little bit. You've invested 2 picks into really, at least high potential pass catching options. We've seen Drake London do it at a high level very early in his career. We know who Kyle Pitts is, although it's easy to forget maybe these days. So to me, if you can't throw it more than, a handful of times in the second half when you're down by like 18 points, that's a problem. And so the Falcons do need to figure out some kind of solution to that. And I think it kind of all comes back to Mariota in some ways, whether he is the problem and he's not the sole problem or not. The way that the coaching staff is treating him, like he cannot throw them back into the game, is a problem, right? So you have to figure out a way to set him up for success. You find a way to get the ball out of his hands more quickly, get guys open, do something, anything, so that he isn't, turning his back on the defense and getting sacked, holding onto the ball, looking for guys who just aren't open, and, letting defenses kind of tee off on him the way they have, 2 out of the last 3 weeks when we've seen this offensive line's weaknesses exposed a little bit. So, and if you're not willing to do that, if you cannot get Mariota in a position where he can, throw the ball a little bit more often, a little more effectively, then yeah, you have to start thinking about a quarterback change. But one way or the other, I don't expect them to change their identity. They're still a run first team. It's what they're built to do. It's what they can do really well. Even right now, to say nothing of when they get maybe Damian Williams and Patterson back, but you do have to figure out a way that if you fall into a hole in a game and you have to throw to get out of it, that the answer isn't, we can't do it. That's just, that's not a great answer for anybody.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, obviously a lot of opinions are going to be involved on what you touched upon, which is, if this quarterback can't do it, then bring in another quarterback that can. And obviously it remains to be seen if that quarterback is any more capable of that. But I think the hope is, and I don't know when you'll next be on the show, Dave, but it'll probably be before the end of the season is up. But if it's, say, in December or January, the hope is that we're not having these conversations. And I think that's kind of the point, going back to what Arthur Smith was saying with the evolution, that this team isn't quite there yet. In terms of being that sort of balanced offense. It's, people usually say balance meaning like, oh, they like to run the football, but actual balance where it's like you can run the ball effectively and throw the ball effectively is actual balance. And right now that's not where they're at. And so hopefully we will see, by year's end, whether that's involving Mariota or whether that's facilitated by a quarterback change. Hopefully by the time we get to the end of the season, we're not having these conversations and we can not look at this, situation moving forward and feel like, something has to give, particularly at the quarterback situation, as well as other areas of this offense. But, on that quarterback situation, it's interesting because a lot of the blame from a lot of people seems to be directed solely at Marcus Mariota. And then some people will say none of the Falcons' offensive issues have anything to do with Marcus Mariota. And that kind of reminds me of another situation with a Another Falcon quarterback. Oh yeah, Matt Ryan. Yeah, that seems to be basically rinse repeat how it just always is with any quarterback in this league. They get all the credit and none of the blame, or all the blame and none of the credit. But we'll continue today's episode jumping into that Matt Ryan conversation because he did get benched today by the Indianapolis Colts, and we'll talk a little bit about what went wrong there, and sort of does that mean now that the Falcons won the trade. And we'll talk about Matt Ryan's legacy in lieu of this benching news as we continue today's episode. But guys, I want to first tell you about Prize Picks, a fun new way to play daily fantasy. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times the money on your entry. And the great thing about Prize Picks is you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. And it's not just NFL, it's NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, and so much more. Prize Picks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the US and Canada. All you have to do is download the Prize Picks app today, or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to use that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And guys, continuing today's episode, if you're enjoying Locked On Falcons, you enjoy the other Locked On Sports Atlanta shows, you can check them out on Amazon Fire TV and Roku. Just download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app for that great local coverage 24/7 and for free today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. So Dave, here talking with you about the Falcons quarterback situation, but we bring up another quarterback situation. And obviously, Locked On Falcons is not the place to get what really went wrong for Matt Ryan in Indianapolis. You go check out Locked On Colts to get Zach and Jake's thoughts on that situation. But we know that Matt Ryan injured his shoulder, and it was announced on Monday that he would be benched in favor of Sam Ehlinger. And it's not just simply related to that injury, although this week it seems like, Ehlinger would be playing because Matt Ryan can't play. But, their head coach, Frank Reich, indicated that their expectation is that Ehlinger will start for the remainder of the season. So this Matt Ryan, era in Indianapolis that we all thought going into the season was going to lead to him a late career blossoming for him has ended with, an absolute whimper 7 games into the season. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, it's just a bad situation, right? Ryan has not been good. Let's put that out there. I know that some people think that we here at the Falcoholic can never say that about Matt Ryan, but I just said it. And I think that, that decline maybe last year that we saw was a little bit steeper than just the issues with the Falcons offense would have indicated. But I also look at this Colts team and, they sort of, as I think Reich said today, promised a situation they couldn't deliver, right? The ground game was nothing. Jonathan Taylor has been curiously quiet. They had, Ryan throwing 35, 40, 50 passes a game behind an offensive line that was just not doing a good job of protecting him. And so, really a kind of an all-around failure here, and it's probably going to lead to some major changes in Indianapolis. I'd have to think you can only, cycle through veteran quarterbacks with a very angry, weird owner for so many years before things kind of blow up for you. So, it's a shame because obviously you want Ryan, who is a franchise legend, the same way that I wanted Julio Jones, who is a franchise legend, to go do great things for another team. And for both of them, it's kind of ending on a sad note, which is a huge bummer. But, I look at this as a situation where, Ryan just didn't play well and the team around him wasn't good enough. And sometimes it's that simple and that depressing.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining it. I guess I ask the next follow-up question, Dave. Does this mean now that the Falcons won that trade?
Well, D'Angelo Malone is clearly a great player. So, yes, I'm going to say right off the bat. I do think, considering the way that they backed themselves into having to trade Ryan, wiped out their leverage and, really did not get all that much for him. And maybe it was all they were ever going to get for him. Who knows? The fact that Ryan has not looked good, They sort of address their quarterback situation pretty well in the short term and the long term, hopefully, knock on wood with Ritter. And the fact that they got a player in Malone who I do think is going to be at least a useful rotational piece, maybe more than that. He looks pretty promising. They've probably won that trade. If Ryan comes back in there in 2 weeks because Ellinger gets hurt and plays some hero ball, maybe we revisit this conversation. But honestly, the fact that they got anything that they were able to clear out, Ryan's contract and kind of start this thing over fresh next year, it probably means it's a win for Atlanta.
Yeah, my stance on it, and I famously was like, I don't know if they won the Julio trade, or infamously, I would say. I think we'll have to see what, in Julio's case, what Troy Anderson is and what D'Angelo Malone is before we can truly say that they've won the trade. And then you couple that with the cap space and the savings, what they do with the cap space. Because if we're sitting here a couple of years from now and being like, we still don't have a quarterback and we're still a middling football team, it doesn't feel like that's a win. But I would certainly say, like, we're probably in the second quarter at this point in time, and we have the lead. I would say that. So it looks good. But, with the Falcons, you can never trust a lead going into the second halves of games. So we'll see how they handle that.
Yeah. That was when you just said that whole 2 years from now with the quarterback thing, man, I winced. Like I felt that. I felt the ghosts of the future.
Yeah. So, guys, that's really it on the Falcons on today's episode. We'll wrap up with a listener question jumped in the chat from Callan Clark, talking a little bit about some of the issues that the Falcons are dealing with in the secondary. And he asked, hi, Aaron, are we going to sign more cornerbacks with all the injuries? Are there some decent free agent corners available we might look at? So, Dave, I'm curious if you've been sort of scouring the, top free agents available list that you can see compiled on various websites at the cornerback position at this point.
I haven't to this point. I know there's a few capable guys out there. I do think the likeliest course of action for this team is not very exciting. But, they have an open roster spot. They now have an open practice squad spot because I believe they released Jordan Brailford earlier today. And so with Terrell being week to week, and hopefully that means 1 week, he'll be missing the Panthers game. What I expect them to do is, add one more guy and then make kind of that game day decision on calling 2 guys up from the practice squad. I don't think it'll be anybody super compelling, but I think, Darren Hall and Isaiah Oliver are healthy. I think they're probably going to get D. Alford back. And I think they'll just kind of try to fill things out with some combination of Cornell Armstrong and, whoever they scoop up out of free agency for a week. I think if Terrell is going to miss the Chargers game, and they're pretty confident that's the case, then maybe you hit the panic button and you go looking for a bigger name, because I don't think they're going to survive Herbert kind of with that approach.
I think that's a fair assessment. So obviously there's 1 week till the trade deadline. I don't expect the Falcons to make a trade or anything really at any position, but certainly not the cornerback position. I agree with your sentiments that they'll probably just play the next man up with Darren Hall and Cornell Armstrong this week. If D. Alford comes back, that will give them a boost. I have looked at a couple of lists. I do keep a spreadsheet of like former players that played under this coaching staff, just because it seems to be that's been generally who they go after when guys are available. And of course, a completely separate spreadsheet for all the Bears players that Ryan Pace is able to convince them to sign. But Tavon Young is a player that I think is out there. I know I think he was with the Bears this past summer, and obviously played for Dean Pease in Baltimore. I know he's, I was going to say he's up there, but actually I think he's only like 29 or something like that. So maybe he's a name out there that you could see them interested in. I know Bless Austin played when Frank Bush was in New York for the Jets and kind of bounced around the league. So that's another name that may be out there. But yeah, I kind of think they'll probably go in-house. And if AJ Terrell is out for an extended period of time, I do think you'll see some urgency there. That week-to-week designation probably means I'd be very confident saying he's not going to play this week. That's usually what that means. The question is that week-to-week like 2 to 3 weeks, or 4 to 6 weeks or something like that? So we'll just sort of have to see how that goes. But usually that sounds like it's not going to be a situation where he's going on IR for 4 weeks and then we just have to wait and see. But we'll keep an eye on that. Obviously, what I will say about the corners is, given the circumstances that they were thrust into against this Bengals team, I don't think Darren Hall and Cornell Armstrong were that problematic relative to what they were dealing with. Like, obviously, we saw, Jamar Chase do his thing against Cornell Armstrong a couple of times, but like, Jamar Chase does that to elite corners in the league. So it's like, you can't really blame Cornell Armstrong. So I don't feel like the Falcons secondary situation is that dire moving forward, but we'll obviously sort of see if they wind up making me regret those words a week from now, where DJ Moore has 184 yards receiving or something like that. Oh, good. Anyway, I was envisioning the darkest timeline. So we'll let that go. Dave, go ahead, plug your stuff and what's coming up on the Falcoholic in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, we'll have a little bit more of the Bengals postmortem, but I do think, as we've talked about already, this was a little bit of a fluke game, so we're not going to dwell on it and say the sky is falling just yet. But a lot of talk about the Panthers, why they're a little bit more interesting after what they did to the Buccaneers and after getting rid of Matt Rule and replacing him with an actual NFL coach for a little bit. And of course, over the weekend, we'll have Aaron Freeman naming 5 Falcons as is tradition. So look forward to that.
Yeah, it's not too often where people have called Steve Wilks an actual NFL coach, but it does seem like, compared to Matt Rule, that is definitely true.
Light years ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see what's up next for the Falcons, and we'll see which Falcons I name this weekend. Guys, really appreciate you tuning in. Of course, check out Dave at thefalcoholic.com, on Twitter at Falcoholic, me, of course, at FalcFans and at Locked On Falcons. Make sure for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, so you can get the biggest headlines and the in-depth reports, insights from the various Locked On experts across all the sports. Follow Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta. Includes Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Braves, as well as 3 shows on the Locked On Sports Atlanta feed: A to Z with Mark Zeno, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, and ATL Day Ones with Jarvis Davis and Tanisha Batiste. I think I'm going to be on A to Z with Mark Zeno tomorrow, so that's an excuse for you guys to check out that episode if you haven't already subscribed to it. And of course, Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube is the home for the Locked On Falcons postcast, where Jarvis Davis and myself are bringing you that insight immediately after the game, post-mortem or celebration, whatever it is, on Locked On Sports Atlanta. So subscribe to that on YouTube. But guys, really appreciate it. Thank you, Dave, again for joining me. Looking forward to our future conversations to see, what has changed from this date to then. But that will do it for us, guys. Really appreciate it. Till then.